Rain slicks the Chicago pavement like fresh oil. Monsters don't sleep in this city. They prowl the alleys, collecting debts in blood. But tonight, a ruthless syndicate boss finds something else entirely blocking his path. A broken, heavy woman asleep on the concrete, clutching a price tag on her life. 3 a.m. was the only time the city shut its mouth. Dante Navarro stepped out of the heavy steel rear door of his club, pulling the collar of his wool overcoat up against the freezing drizzle. He lit a cigarette. The brief flash of the lighter illuminated the sharp, unforgiving lines of his face. At 38, Dante ran the South Side distribution rings with a mechanical, quiet brutality. He didn't yell. He didn't make threats. He just made people disappear. Behind him, the heavy thud of boots signaled his 2 shadows, Jared and Toby. They were large men, built for violence, their suits straining at the shoulders. "Cars parked a block down, boss," Jared grunted, pulling his keys from his pocket. Construction on the main Ave blocked the alley. Dante didn't answer. He just exhaled a stream of grey smoke into the damp air and started walking. The alley smelled of rotting garbage and wet asphalt. The only sound was the crunch of their expensive leather shoes against the grit. They made it halfway down the block when Toby stopped. "What the hell is that?" Dante paused. A few yards ahead, tucked against the brick wall beneath a rusted exhaust vent, was a pile of blankets. No, not blankets. A person, Jared scoffed, reaching into his jacket. "Fucking junkies, I'll clear 'em out." "Wait," Dante said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it stopped the massive enforcer dead in his tracks. Dante stepped closer. The glow of a distant street lamp cut through the shadows. It wasn't a junkie. It was a woman. She was asleep on the freezing concrete, huddled into a massive, faded men's winter coat that didn't even come close to zipping shut over her wide, soft stomach. She was a fat woman. There was no hiding it, no polite euphemism to dress it up. Her thick thighs were clad in cheap, threadbare leggings that stretched thin over her flesh, soaked through from the wet ground. Her swollen ankles spilled over the edges of scuffed, laceless sneakers. She had pulled her arms inward, trying to make her large frame as small as possible against the biting wind, but her sheer size made it impossible. She was shivering violently. Her face was pressed against her heavy upper arm, pale and doughy, her cheeks flushed red from the cold. Wet strands of dull brown hair clung to her forehead. Jared kicked a loose piece of gravel toward her. It bounced off her sneaker. She didn't stir, her breathing labored and wet. "Boss, leave it! Let the sanitation department deal with her in the morning." Dante's eyes drifted from her pale, exhausted face down to her hands. Her thick fingers, blue at the knuckles, were wrapped in a death grip around a slightly crumpled manila envelope. The name scrawled on the front in black marker caught his eye. "Navarro." Dante dropped his cigarette. He crushed it slowly beneath his heel. "Pick her up," Dante said. Jared blinked. "What?" "Boss, she's filthy. She smells like wet dog and cheap grease. She's just some fat street rat." Dante turned his head just an inch, fixing Jared with a dead, flat stare. "Did I stutter? Pick her up." Toby, reading the sudden, dangerous drop in the temperature of the conversation, stepped forward immediately. He reached down and grabbed the woman's shoulder. She woke with a sudden, violent gasp. Her eyes snapped open, wide and terrified, darting blindly in the dark. She scrambled backward, her heavy body scraping against the rough brick wall. She couldn't get her footing. Her knees buckled under her weight, and she let out a pathetic, breathless sob as she hit the concrete again. Please don't touch me," she gasped, her voice hoarse and rattling in her chest. She pulled the manila envelope tight against her large breasts, acting as an instinctive shield. Dante stepped into her line of sight. He looked down at her. He took in the sheer exhaustion radiating from her. She looked like a woman who had spent a lifetime apologizing for the space she took up. completely beaten down by gravity, poverty, and fear. "What's in the envelope?" Dante asked. His voice was smooth, void of any malice, which usually terrified people more than anger. She stared at his shoes. Slowly, she looked up at his tailored suit, his dark eyes. She swallowed hard. Are you him? Are you Navarro?" "I am." Her chin trembled. She looked down at her own massive, trembling body, profoundly aware of how pitiful she must look to a man who wore suits that cost more than her life. She was fat, freezing, and lying in a puddle. "My name is Hannah," she whispered. "Hannah Jenkins. My husband was Evan." Jared let out a low whistle behind Dante. Evan Jenkins was a low-level runner who had skimmed 50 grand off Dante's books. Evan had conveniently wrapped his sedan around a concrete pillar a week ago, before Dante's men could extract the debt from his kneecaps. "Evan is dead," Dante stated. "I know," Hannah said, her voice cracking. "I buried him Tuesday." She struggled to push herself up, panting from the exertion. She managed to get onto her knees, her wet leggings clinging to the heavy folds of her legs. She held the envelope up with 2 trembling, thick hands. "He owed you money," she said, tears finally spilling over her round cheeks, cutting through the grime on her face. "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know until the bank called about the second mortgage. I don't have the cash. He emptied my accounts, but this is the deed to my house. It's fully paid off. It's worth at least 80 grand. Take it." Dante didn't take the envelope. He just looked at her. "You slept in an alley in freezing rain to hand-deliver a deed to a man who would just as easily put a bullet in your head?" Dante asked, his tone analytical, passing out the logic. Hannah let out a wet, bitter laugh. "They changed the locks on my apartment yesterday. I had nowhere else to go. I figured if I waited here, you'd find me. And if you shot me, at least I wouldn't be cold anymore." The brutal honesty hung in the damp air. She wasn't begging for her life. She was just tired, bone-tired, crushed under the weight of a dead man's sins and a world that threw away people who looked like her. Dante stared at her. He saw the bruised skin around her wrists. Evan's handiwork, no doubt. He saw the way she instinctively curled her shoulders inward, trying to hide her heavy torso, ashamed of her own body, even in the face of death. "Jared, Toby," Dante said, not breaking eye contact with Hannah. "Yeah, boss?" "Get her in the car." Jared opened his mouth to protest, looked at Dante's profile and shut it again. Toby stepped forward, gripping Hannah by the upper arms. He grunted with effort as he hauled her heavy frame upward. She stumbled, her sheer weight making her clumsy on her numb feet. But Toby kept her upright. Hannah looked at Dante in absolute terror. This was it. She was being taken to the river. "Please," she sobbed softly, not fighting, just surrendering. "Make it quick." Dante finally reached out and took the envelope from her cold fingers. "Nobody is dying tonight, Hannah," Dante said. He turned his back on her and walked toward the street. "Bring her." The interior of the Maybach SUV smelled of rich leather and subtle cologne. It was 80 degrees inside, a stark, shocking contrast to the freezing misery of the alley. Toby practically shoved Hannah into the spacious back seat before slamming the heavy door shut. She fell back against the pristine leather, feeling massive, awkward, and filthy. The seat was designed for comfort, but she felt like a grotesque stain against it. Her wet coat soaked immediately into the upholstery. She tried to pull herself upright, her thick thighs rubbing together in her soaked leggings, her breath coming in short, panicked pants. Dante sat in the seat opposite her, separated by a center console. He poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter built into the armrest. He held it out to her. Hannah stared at it. She didn't move. She was trapped in a moving vault with a ghost. "Drink it," Dante commanded quietly. "Your lips are blue." With a trembling hand, her thick fingers wrapped around the delicate crystal glass. She brought it to her lips and swallowed. The whiskey burned like battery acid down her throat, but within seconds, a fierce, radiating heat bloomed in her chest. She coughed, a deep, rattling sound, wiping her mouth with the back of her fleshy hand. Up front, Jared was driving in dead silence. The partition window was rolled down just an inch, letting the quiet hum of the engine into the cabin. The men in the front were radiating confusion. Dante Navarro didn't do charity. He didn't pick up strays. And he certainly didn't let wet, overweight women ruin the interior of his $200,000 car. Hannah sat the glass carefully in the cup holder. She squeezed her eyes shut. The heat of the car was thawing her frozen skin, bringing a painful, prickling sensation to her arms and legs. She felt sweat begin to form on the back of her neck, mixing with the rainwater. She felt utterly disgusting. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice tight. She kept her eyes glued to her own lap, staring at her wide stomach. "You have the deed. We're square. Just drop me off at a bus station." "Anywhere." Dante tapped the manila envelope against his knee. He unspooled the string tie and pulled out the folded paper. He scanned it quickly under the soft, overhead cabin light. It was legitimate. A small, run-down house in the suburbs, worth exactly what she said it was. "Evan stole $50,000, Dante said slowly, his voice vibrating with a quiet authority that commanded the entire space. "He spent it on coke and a blonde waitress who works at a diner on 4th Street. "Did you know about her?" Hannah flinched as if he had struck her. The heavy flesh of her chin trembled, but she bit her lip hard. "Yes, and you stayed with him." "I didn't have money to leave," she whispered. Her voice was raw with shame. "And nobody else wanted me. Look at me." She finally looked up, gesturing helplessly to her own heavy body. Tears streamed down her round cheeks. "He reminded me every day how lucky I was that he put up with a fat pig like me. He took the money. He took everything. The house is all that's left. Take it. Please. Just let me walk away." Dante leaned back into the leather seat. He studied her in the dim light. Most people in his world were driven by greed, by ego, by a frantic need for power. They lied to his face. They begged. They tried to bargain with things they didn't own. Hannah was different. She had sat in the freezing rain to give away the very last thing tying her to the earth, simply to balance a ledger she hadn't unbalanced. She had fully expected to be murdered. She possessed a bleak, unflinching honesty that Dante hadn't seen in decades. He looked at the deed. Then, methodically, he tore it in half. The sound of the thick paper ripping echoed loudly in the quiet car. Jared's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror in shock. Hannah gasped, leaning forward, her heavy chest heaving. "What are you doing?" she cried out. Dante tore the papers again, into quarters, and tossed them onto the floor mat. "The debt is void," Dante said. "Evan paid with his life." "But the bank," Hannah stammered, her mind struggling to catch up. "The locks. I can't go back there. I don't have anywhere to go." "I know," Dante said. He poured himself a glass of whiskey this time, took a slow sip, and set it down. He looked at her, his dark eyes entirely unreadable. "You're going to come work for me?" Hannah froze. She stared at him, bewildered. "Work for you? Doing what? I can't run drugs. I can't fight." She gripped the excess fabric of her coat, deeply aware of her physical limitations. "I'm slow. I'm fat. I can't do anything for a man like you." "You can read a ledger," Dante corrected sharply. "I saw your hands in the alley, the calluses on your middle finger from holding a pen. You kept Evan's books. You managed the few scraps of legitimate cash he brought in. Didn't you?" Hannah swallowed hard. "Yes, I'm an accountant. Was. My current bookkeeper is skimming. Dante said casually, as if discussing the weather. He thinks I don't notice because the numbers are buried deep. He's going to retire by the end of the week. I need someone who knows the value of $1 and is far too afraid of me to steal. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Hannah pressed herself back into the seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. You think your size makes you useless, Hannah, Dante murmured, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a strange, heavy intensity. I see a woman who survived a parasite for a husband, survived poverty, and had the sheer grit to sit outside my door, waiting for a bullet to make things right. You're not fragile. I don't need fragile. Hannah couldn't breathe. The air in the car suddenly felt too thick. Nobody had ever looked at her like this. Not with pity, not with disgust. He was looking at her like she was an asset, like she had value. Jared, Dante called out to the front seat. Yeah, boss? Jared's voice was tight, bewildered by what he was hearing. Cancel the drop at the docks. We're going to the estate. Tell Maria to prepare a guest room on the first floor. Have her draw a hot bath and find some clothes. Boss, Jared hesitated, staring in the rearview mirror at the wet, heavy woman ruining the back seat. You're taking her to your house? Drive the car, Jared, Dante snapped, the sudden bite in his voice making the massive enforcer flinch and immediately accelerate. Dante turned his gaze back to Hannah. She was trembling again, but this time not from the cold. You work for me now, Dante told her quietly. Nobody touches you. Nobody calls you names. You balance my books, and you get your life back. Hannah closed her eyes, the exhaustion finally pulling her under. For the first time in 10 years, the heavy, crushing weight of the world lifted just an inch off her broad shoulders. Hannah woke to the sensation of falling. She gasped, her thick arms flailing out, expecting her knuckles to scrape against the freezing, wet brick of the alleyway. Instead, her hands sank into high thread-count Egyptian cotton. She blinked against the soft morning light filtering through heavy velvet drapes. She was lying in a bed large enough to park a compact car in. The room was immense, panelled in dark cherry wood, devoid of the grime and peeling paint she was used to. It smelled like beeswax and fresh linen. Memory rushed back like a physical blow. The rain, the car, the man with the dead eyes who tore her death warrant to shreds. Hannah sat up slowly. Her joints ached with a deep, throbbing stiffness. She looked down at herself. Someone, the housekeeper, Maria, a stern older woman with sharp eyes, had helped her out of her soaked, filthy clothes last night and into a massive plush terry cloth robe. It actually wrapped all the way around her heavy stomach and tied securely at the waist. She didn't feel exposed. She felt warm. A soft knock at the door made her jump. The handle turned, and Maria stepped in carrying a stack of folded clothes. Mr. Navarro left these, Maria said. Her accent was thick, her tone brisk but not unkind. His old sweatpants, a few heavy sweaters. They will be loose on you, but they are clean. Get dressed. He expects you in his study in 20 minutes. Hannah swallowed dryly. Thank you. She dressed quickly, her thick fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar, high-quality wool of a charcoal sweater. It was huge on her, swallowing her broad shoulders and draping over the heavy rolls of her waist. For the first time in years, her clothes weren't cutting into her skin. When she stepped out into the hallway, Toby was waiting. The massive enforcer looked at her, his expression entirely unreadable. He didn't sneer. He didn't make a crack about her weight, which Evan's friends would have done immediately. Dante's men operated under a strict, terrifying discipline. Dante had said she was his accountant. That meant she was untouchable. Toby escorted her to a set of heavy oak doors at the end of the hall and pushed them open. Dante's study was a cavern of leather bindings and brass fixtures. Dante sat behind a massive mahogany desk, sipping black coffee. Jared stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Sit," Dante said, not looking up from his tablet. Hannah walked awkwardly across the Persian rug, hyper-aware of her heavy footfalls. She sat in a reinforced leather armchair opposite his desk. Dante slid a thick, leather-bound ledger across the polished wood, followed by a stack of printed bank statements and a gold fountain pen. "3 shell companies," Dante said quietly, finally looking up. His dark eyes locked onto hers. "2 trucking fronts, 1 waste management. My margins are down 8% this quarter. The current bookkeeper, Thomas, claims inflation and fuel costs. Prove him wrong." Hannah looked at the ledger. This was her language. Numbers didn't judge her. Numbers didn't care if she was fat or ugly or tired. They either balanced or they lied. She opened the heavy cover. The room went silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. For the next 4 hours, Hannah didn't move from the chair. She stopped shaking. She stopped hyperventilating. She fell into the rhythm of the ink and the columns. Her thick fingers flew across a heavy brass calculator Dante had pushed toward her. She cross-referenced invoice dates with fuel surcharges. She found the bleeding edge of the lie. Dante watched her. He didn't work. He just observed. He watched the way her posture shifted from the terrified, hunched animal in the alley to something remarkably solid. When she worked, she wasn't a victim. Her jaw set, her eyes sharpened. Jared shifted restlessly by the window. He was a man of action. Watching a woman do math was agonizing. "Boss, she's not gonna find—" "Quiet," Dante snapped, never taking his eyes off Hannah. At precisely 1 o'clock, Hannah put the gold pen down. She looked up, pushing a stray strand of dull brown hair behind her ear. "He's not skimming fuel," Hannah said. Her voice was steady. It was the loudest they had heard her speak. "He's overstating the weight of the hauls on paper, paying out the actual tonnage to the drivers, and pocketing the phantom difference. The ghost loads are routed through a dummy LLC, filed in Delaware. I have the routing numbers right here." She turned the ledger around, sliding it back to Dante. She tapped a thick, calloused finger firmly on a highlighted column. "He stole $240,000 since April," she stated. Dante looked at the numbers. Then he looked at Jared. Jared's mouth fell open slightly. The towering enforcer stared at the fat, exhausted woman in his boss's sweater as if she had just performed magic. The sheer disrespect she had unraveled in a few hours was staggering. Dante closed the ledger with a quiet thud. "Bring Thomas here," Dante ordered. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees the moment Thomas was dragged through the doors. He was a wiry man in a sharp suit, sweating profusely. Toby tossed him into the center of the room. Thomas stumbled, catching his balance, his eyes darting frantically between Dante, the enforcers, and finally landing on Hannah. "Dante, I don't know what this is," Thomas stammered, adjusting his collar. "I've been loyal for 10 years. Dante remained seated. He steepled his fingers. "You've been stealing for 6 months, Thomas. 240,000. Ghost loads on the trucking routes." Thomas turned pale. His eyes shot to the ledger on the desk, then to Hannah, who was sitting quietly in the leather armchair. Realization hit him, followed immediately by defensive rage. It was the instinctive reaction of a weak man cornered by his own actions. "Her?" Thomas spat, pointing a shaking finger at Hannah. "You're listening to her? She's a nobody. Look at her, Dante. She's a disgusting fat street rat. You pulled a pig out of an alley and you're letting her read my books?" The silence that followed was absolute. Hannah shrank back into the chair. The sudden cruelty hit her like a physical strike. The warmth of the room vanished, replaced by the crushing familiarity of being mocked. She dropped her gaze to her heavy thighs, her cheeks burning dark red. She was right back in her living room with Evan. Dante stood up. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, terrifying grace of a predator that had already secured the kill. He walked around the massive mahogany desk and stopped directly in front of Thomas. "You stole my money," Dante said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "That makes you a thief." Dante reached out, his hand moving so fast it was a blur. He gripped Thomas by the throat, hoisting the wiry man onto his tiptoes. Thomas choked, his hands grasping frantically at Dante's iron grip. "But you disrespected my accountant in my own house," Dante continued, stepping closer, forcing Thomas to look into his dead, obsidian eyes. "That makes you a dead man." Dante didn't look back. "Jared, Toby, take him to the warehouse. Get the routing numbers for the Delaware account out of him. Then burn the trash." "Yes, boss," Jared said. He grabbed Thomas by the collar of his expensive suit, dragging the gagging, terrified man out of the study. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them. The silence returned, heavier this time. Hannah was trembling violently. Her hands covered her face, stifling a quiet sob. She had just sentenced a man to death with a ballpoint pen. She was a murderer now, too. Dante walked over to the side table. He poured a single glass of water from a crystal pitcher. He walked back and stood before her. "Take your hands away from your face, Hannah," he commanded gently. She slowly lowered her thick hands. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her pale skin. He's going to die," she whispered. "He made a choice," Dante said flatly. "You simply did the math. The numbers don't bleed, Hannah. You're not responsible for his greed." He held out the glass of water. She took it, her fingers brushing against his cold, hard knuckles. "He was right, though," she choked out, looking down at her bulky frame wrapped in the oversized sweater. "I'm a mess. I don't belong in a place like this. With people like you." Dante leaned down, placing a hand on the armrests of her chair, boxing her in. His face was inches from hers. She smelled his cologne, cedar and smoke. "Let me make something perfectly clear," Dante said, his gaze dropping to her trembling lips before locking onto her eyes. "In my world, physical beauty is cheap. It's bought and sold every day. Loyalty, brilliance, and grit. Those are priceless. You have a sharper mind than men. I pay $250,000 a year." He reached out. With a surprising, deliberate gentleness, his thumb wiped a tear from her soft, round cheek. "You don't apologize for taking up space in this house," Dante murmured, the cold detachment finally melting into something dark, possessive, and dangerously warm. "You belong exactly where I put you, with me." Hannah looked into the eyes of the monster who ran the city. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the urge to hide. She was heavy. She was scarred. And she was safe. Did Hannah's sheer grit and brilliant mind leave you just as speechless as Dante's men? Sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones the world tries to make invisible. Dante saw her true worth when no one else did. If you loved this intense, slow-burn Mafia romance, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. And don't forget to subscribe for more gritty, emotional storytelling every single week.